Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. On the podcast, I seek out and interview entrepreneurs, leading business people, authors, tech leaders, academics, and generally cool people doing interesting stuff in the service and experience space. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have, no less, Wharton Professor Stefano Pontoni, who's the Director of AI at Wharton, and also his partner in crime, Jeremy Korst, who is the former executive at Microsoft and T-Mobile, but is now the president of GBK. Welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast. How are you doing this fine afternoon?
Morning here, and doing quite well. It's really cold, so I've been enjoying this walk this morning coming in. Thank you for having us.
It's even a little bit more morning here in Seattle, and while cold, also adding a bit of moisture too.
Well, I tell you what we should do. And that's what I've learned over the years is because you speak to different people in different time zones, and people are going, "Good morning, good day, good afternoon." So good day is definitely the thing to kind of like to fix on. But let's get going, shall we? So, for the benefit of our listeners who are not familiar with your work, Jeremy, you are this is your twofer. This is your kind of second time that you've been on the podcast, so welcome back. But for people that are not familiar with you and your work, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do? I mean, Jeremy, I'll start with you, and then Stefano will kind of come together, and then we can talk about kind of how you guys work together.
Yeah, great. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm president of GBK Collective. We're a company that focuses on data and analytical and consumer insights strategies for major brands. And so I bring with me, so I crossed the chasm to become a consultant. I spent most of my life in companies, as you mentioned, in product management and ultimately marketing, becoming a CMO in some large technology companies and more recently some smaller ones. And I still stay pretty involved in the early stage companies as well, where I'm an advisor and board member. So I span a broad span of small and large companies, which makes it interesting. So that's what I do.
Perfect. And thank you. And also welcome back, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And so, Stefano, the same applies to you? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
I'm a professor of marketing at the Wharton School, the University of Pennsylvania, and my area of interest is understanding the behavioral science of artificial intelligence. Basically, I study AI, not from the algorithmic side, but from the human side, looking at consumer acceptance of the technology, barriers to adoption, integration of AI into business processes, and so on. And this was a natural angle for a collaboration with Jeremy, because Jeremy was interested, together with the folks at JBK Collective, to understand the adoption of generative AI today, so the state of play. And it was a great collaboration. I'm really delighted and grateful that they brought me on board.
Fantastic. And now, it's a brilliant segue, Stefano, because I was just about to ask you about that collaboration, because I know that GBK Collective and yourself have just published a new report, and it's called The Rise of Generative AI in the Enterprise. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. But before we actually dive into it, can you tell us a little bit about the report and how it came about and what the main headlines were? I mean, yeah, tell us about the genesis. I mean, Jeremy, was it your idea and then you found Stefano, or Stefano, was it your idea and you found Jeremy, or did you just kind of your eyes met across kind of like a well-lit room and then it was music started playing? How did it come about?
Let me give all the credit to Jeremy, okay? So I let him let him take all the credit.
No, as these things happen, this is one of the reasons I really love the work we do at GBK is they really just kind of come about more naturally as we evolve these discussions. And so, one of the things we get to do is we work with some of the top academic minds in the world as part of our consultancy. So we bring in people like Stefano and others into the work we're doing with our major brands. And so Stefano I'd been introduced to Stefano because of one of our major clients' interest in this area. And we kept discussing, this topic. I was fascinated by his background in the interaction between human and technology, because I, of course, had seen that throughout my career. But more and more, as we saw the headlines around AI, as we talked to our clients and analysts, there's a lot of predictions about what was going to happen, and a lot of headlines around that. And we thought, well, wait a minute, like, why don't we spend some time understanding what is actually happening now with real users in the enterprise and within companies, and what they think is going to happen. So that was really the genesis. But in terms of, I think where it came from an idea, they just natural evolution of the discussions we were having with, with real clients.
And the report, I mean, what are the big kind of headlines kind of like coming out of it? Because I mean, like, we can all agree the generative AI was like the story of 2023, and it's this juggernaut just like left, and there's a lot of people kind of jumped on and did a whole bunch of kind of like things, and I think the momentum will continue into this year. But like, what are the big findings, main headlines out of the report? Stefano.
Happy to start. There's a lot of stuff there. First, we should say what we did, and it's a large survey. We have. Jeremy, how many exactly? 670 so?
So exactly.
A large number of senior executives across different functions and different verticals. We're talking about US corporates. And so we have a good snapshot of the state of play. I think the data collection was in August, is that right? Or I think basically during the summer. And obviously these figures will be moving target. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are probably, you survey every couple of months, you'll get slightly different numbers. But I think to me, what was really a big eye-opener, actually there were a few. One of them was simply just how far and deep adoption already is. So this is obviously self-reports. We don't know exactly what they're doing with it and the extent to which they really do what they say in the survey. But I think there's good ground to argue that this is not a technology that is around the corner, that might be adopted soon or where there's a lot of hype about. Obviously, there is a lot of expectation and hype on generative AI, but this is something that is already percolating quite deep into the work practice of many, many people. So we find that over 50% of the sample have said in the survey that they have or already using generative AI tools in their work. Pretty much every company that were included in the survey are having pretty high numbers on the use cases that we listed in the survey. Just as a note aside on that, we basically made a laundry list of all possible use cases we could think of. Mm-hmm. And it's a long list. And we thought, okay, maybe some of them will be endorsed by a lot of companies and some of them will be fewer, and see what people are thinking. And basically it's maxing out almost on everything, meaning we see for a lot of use cases upward of 70, sometimes 80% of respondents say that the company is pursuing or plans to pursue in short order. So this is basically to say that it's not one thing companies are going to do with it. It's going to be many things. And it's not just some companies thinking of doing it, but it's almost every company. So it seems to be really here today. We'll see the extent to which it can deliver. Obviously, these are early experiments for most organizations, mm-hmm. but there's no doubt that this is not something that we expect will start taking off. This is already there. I mean, all these companies already have teams working on it, already tinkering and trying with different use cases. And I think it's exciting to see over the coming 6-12 months how many of them will start being able to realize real gains from it.
Jeremy, anything to add on that? Because I've also wanted to kind of really pick, to zoom in on what Stefano was saying about these kind of like use cases. You said you produced this long list of use cases, but was there any kind of like clear kind of clump of these are some of the big favorites, as it were?
Well, I think something to add as some more context too is we did see some interesting differences among those who reported using AI at work. One was around company size. So what we saw was smaller enterprise. We cut off our sample at about 50 million in revenue. So mm-hmm. It's very large companies. But even if we separate among them, we saw higher reported usage in smaller companies versus large companies. And maybe that says something about technology adoption overall. Maybe that says something about governance of technology within larger organizations, to be seen. But another interesting difference we saw as we looked into this is that those who reported using AI had much more positive associations with the technology and its predicted use versus those who haven't yet. And so whether that's causal or not is to be seen, but those who are optimistic, excited, and impressed versus those who are cautious, is really clear between users and non-users. And then another difference we saw was among functions. And while all functions reported, some strong usage of AI at work, Stefano and I recently had actually an HBR article on the insight that marketers, our colleagues in marketing, seem to be the least of those among all functions, even around operations, in using AI. So those are some of the major differences that we saw. While to Stefano's point is when it comes down to the predicted uses and use cases was pretty in the future was pretty strong across the board.
Just digging into that kind of point about kind of like marketing, sort of like not, well, maybe lagging behind a little bit. Do you have any view on kind of what's maybe driving that, or are they waiting and seeing and then going to be fast? They're going to play fast catch up, or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, there's a couple things. And I know Stefano has a point of view on this too, which I think is spot on. But I think one part of that, having been a CMO, having seen the major transition in the marketing function over the last decade, in particular, of the need for understanding analysis and data and the skills and changes required in marketing for that, the dramatic adoption of various technologies within the CMO's organization. Part of this, I wonder, is if it's fatigue. There's been so much change in what the role requires and technology adoption. And perhaps there's whether it's fatigue or a wait and see, that's at least part of it. But I know Stefano has another interesting perspective as well.
There are probably a number of reasons, and one of them might be also something around concern with data privacy. A lot of marketing users may center on personalization, and there might be some concerns about that. And certainly, that's actually something that in the survey we see. I think there is another element, maybe a trickier one, which is also, I think, for a lot of marketers, generative AI is, potentially a threatening technology. There's basically, if you think about what marketing is about, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is about content creation of some sort, whether it is creating advertising, social media posts, email campaigns, support material for salespersons, or whatever. There's a lot of marketing activities is basically packaging ideas for customers. And generative AI obviously increasingly can do a lot of that. And so for a lot of marketeers, there might be also this feeling of looming threat almost. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if some of that reluctance may also be caused by the psychological difficulties that may be accompanying this kind of technology as it is deployed in marketing. We should say that, in some, it is not maybe surprising that people work in IT or, more techie kind of parts of a company report higher users. This is just generally more techie people overall. But we find that in our stats, even compared to HR managers, marketing were lagging behind. And that maybe you wouldn't expect necessarily. If you look at the use cases that rank the highest in the survey, a lot of them are marketing related. You have data analysis, obviously relevant to market research. You have content creation in various items that we measured. And so, and this bears out also in other academic research showing that marketing jobs are among the most vulnerable or exposed to a generative AI tool. I don't mean to say necessarily that generative AI is going to replace marketeers, but the world of marketing is going to change substantially. I think in many ways for the better, but obviously any change is painful.
Thank you for that. That's kind of that adds really useful and interesting kind of color to some of those kind of findings. But I want to sort of dig into some of the particular statements that are in the report that I wanted to ask you about, because just to highlight some of the things that are in there. I mean, because like you said before, people were overwhelmingly positive about generative AI's kind of future. And in fact, I think your report says that 3 in 4 leaders are positive about generative AI's kind of future, but it also the report also states that reservations persist. And so it's not everybody's like, we're gung-ho and we're going to have at it sort of thing, these reservations. And I think you alluded to it, Stefano, around maybe data privacy and sort of things. But Jeremy, I wanted to maybe come to you and say, well, can you give me a view on what some of these reservations kind of are?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any new technology or other, there's natural tendencies for some bit of caution, and we definitely see that here. Our survey saw some of the concerns that we've seen in media and reported as well around things around data privacy, as Stefano is saying about the concern for bias, et cetera. But then moreover, we also just saw, an understanding of the organizational change that this technology, is going to require, about the skills within the team and having to perhaps rely more on outside experts or even new talent within the organization to be able to navigate, that type of that transition as part of the concerns or caution in moving forward with the technology.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned kind of talent there, and also Stefano, you you talked about how marketers might have reservations or about how it's going to impact their role going forward. But also the report also alludes to this idea about leaders having mixed views about how generative AI is going to impact talent just more broadly. I mean, can you tell me a bit more about kind of that? Is it just about a replacement thing, or is there a capability gap that people need to kind of upskill themselves so they can figure out how to get the most out of those tools, or what's kind of going on?
The survey was quite comprehensive. We did not only look at concrete kind of use cases or industry kind of variables. We also tried to understand psychological reactions to generative AI. So we did have a lot of items about how they felt, so emotion kind of measure, both positive and negative. And one element that I really was interested in trying to learn more about was just how people see this technology and its role in organization. A lot of the discussion that you read about is about the replacement of human labor. The headlines that you see, generative AI now can do this, can do that, can do this, can do that. So it's a lot of it about, or maybe can do it better than people. Mm-hmm. And certainly we are going to see a lot of replacement where tasks that previously would be done by human employees now can be handled to a large extent to algorithms. But I think I find that a very limited view of the potential generative AI to, improve organizational decision-making and organizational behavior. To me, a lot of the potential lies in complementing human intelligence and make us more productive, make us more effective, and make work more meaningful, in fact. So I was curious to see whether you would see two clusters of people: the people who would see this technology as an opportunity for flourishing, or people who would see this opportunity as essentially the obsolescence of human intelligence. And we don't really see that, actually. What we observe is a difference between people in the extent to which the technology is powerful, mm-hmm. and they believe the technology will have a big impact. And most people think it will have quite a big impact, but there is some heterogeneity there. And what we observe is that those who believe in the technology believe we will do both replacement and enhancement, right? And so it is a bit maybe more complicated picture than maybe I had expected, meaning that it's really going to be a combination of efficiency and effectiveness. It's going to be both a combination of finding ways to reduce cost by leveraging generative AI to do things quicker, and with less need for human labor, but at the same time also do things better. And for example, take an example like email personalization. Now, companies do email personalization, but a lot of the times the personalization is limited to your name at the start of the email. There isn't necessarily all that much sophistication going on beyond that. And these kind of technology may enable companies to really tailor a message to the exact history of interactions with a client in terms of what they've done, what they bought, what they interacted with, the calls they've gotten, and so forth. And that email now can be really for them. And so this is like an enormous improvement potential for marketing relationship management. But whether companies are going to be able to realize that in short order, of course, depends on a lot of things, including also data privacy and a bunch of other stuff.
I mean, linked to that, Jeremy, I wonder, because it's towards the back end of the year, I kind of put together a curated sort of set of predictions. So I get a whole bunch of people kind of send me a whole bunch of kind of like stuff, and I could try and sift through it all and try and pick out some things, try and tell a story that makes kind of like, sense out of kind of what's kind of going on. And one of the things that stood out, it says, despite, consumers being under pressure because of, still interest rates and inflation and tight economic conditions and all these different things, and despite all the movements and the interest in generative AI, is that employee experience was still going to be like number one sort of like priority on most kind of like C-suites. And given all this impact on tools and teams and things, I mean, do you think that to get the most out of this, do you think that maybe organizations need to be a bit more intentional about how they envision the future and how they kind of the technology can fit into that to allow them to enable that kind of that vision? So almost like, do we need to become more intentional about our employee experience and how it's going to drive improvements in customer experience in order to maximize our ability to get the most out of the technology? Do you think that's fair?
Well, I think that resonates with a lot of conversations I've had with senior executives at major companies. And, both in the way that the technology around the AI is going to improve the work functions for certain groups within the organization, perhaps taking some of the more routine tasks off their plate, let them focus on more interesting work. But I think from a company perspective, also ensuring that they're investing in upskilling their workforce to be able to use AI effectively in their job and for both the employee experience and the customer experience, so that they can do that. And in fact, another hat that I wear is at the Wharton School. I'm on the executive advisory board there, and Stefano, I know, works with executive education. We're getting quite a bit of inbound interest from major companies to help them do exactly that. Is how do we understand the potential, the risks, the concerns, et cetera, really quickly, so that we can equip our employees with that understanding so that they see this as less of a threat and more of an opportunity, and then be able to start understanding how they can more effectively use that across the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, Stefano, anything to add to that, or is that something that's echoing your experience?
To me, one of the more interesting questions in the space of generative AI is, what are we going to do? There's no template, there's no menu, there's no one knows, basically, which is beautiful, right? Because in many ways you find that it's really a moment of excitement. There's I've never been, I think, experiencing this level of willingness for conversations and exchange. That people just want to interact and engage with others, try to learn what this means in general. And I think companies will try different things, and I think the way they'll go about it will probably be a function of their corporate culture, maybe their industry also, the extent to which certain concerns are more versus less salient. But one element of our study that I found quite interesting was that we added some questions trying to understand the extent to which they'll do this internally, or they'll get some help in. And I think Jeremy's right, pointing to a lot of interest for organizations to find partners that can help them learn and implement. And some of them will be the big, consulting companies that have been supporting, clients in digital transformation already for over a decade. There will be parties like the Wharton School that will be more on the side of trying to, see what's possible. So we've had, a lot of interest, and already several companies coming in on campus to learn from our experts on what generative AI can do for business transformation. In fact, we are running an open program out of San Francisco in March. We still have a few seats left for those who are interested. And then there will be this idea: do we create internal teams? Do we bring in consultants? To what extent do we put them in charge versus not? I think that it's good to bring people in to get a fresh perspective and also expertise that is very scarce right now. But I think it's also that this technology is so important that I do believe internal people need to be very, very involved and in charge ultimately. This is not something I would just delegate. Okay, this is an interesting technology implementation project. Let's have these guys do it for us. I think this is just too important. I think you need to have really a lot of very internal involvement. And so you probably see that where you have people coming in and then dedicated teams inside, and the extent to which people are going to have a more deliberative experimentation or just already some kind of business objective and just run it as a regular project. I don't know. My advice for companies would be try things out because nobody really knows what it can do. And so I think to be limiting and only think about 3 or 4 obvious use cases might be, leaving a lot of potential on the table. And I would probably say if you can find individuals in your organization who are the kind of individuals who really tinker and can learn, then let them spend a part of their time budget just on learning. And then hopefully they can report back. That knowledge should be explicit, not just tacit in the head of these 5 people or whatever. But then maybe everybody can learn and we can see what it can do for every business function. This is not about one function or one office. I mean, this is potentially any.
Excellent. I mean, that's a great recommendation, and it's something I was going to come on to as well. Kind of like, so in terms of like, given all of the potential and all that, some of the reservations and stuff, but what recommendations would you share? And Stefanos, that's a great one around dedicate some budget, some time, some people to go out and learn and to bring it back and make that knowledge explicit and to share it around so you can explore the potential. But Jeremy, any other recommendations that you would kind of like share for brands that want to apply generative AI kind of in their business? Where should they start?
Yeah, I think the first part of this, capturing some of what we've just talked about is we've heard about this. Hey, is it going to replace or enhance skills? And one of the common conversations I've heard, in the last few months in particular is, hey, will this technology replace a function or will it enhance? And I think what we're finding is that it may not replace that person or that function, but somebody who understands how to use AI may replace someone who doesn't. And so I think the recommendation is to keep that in mind as we move forward, both individually as professionals, but also as organizational leaders of how we're going to equip our teams to be able to navigate this effectively and use it for the best interest of them as well as our customers. And Stefano's point is spot on. I think this notion of experimentation and translating that to explicit organizational knowledge is absolutely key. I think another recommendation is to understand that the human element and the strategy that's required within this, to leverage this technology effectively is so important. I think back, I was having a conversation earlier this week about data science. And for those of us in large organizations, the promise of data science, originally it was like, hey, let's just go hire some really smart data scientists, go put them in a room, we can feed them with data, and all of a sudden our strategies will be more clear. Well, I'm oversimplifying the case, but I think many of us experienced that where we quickly learned that there was a combination of strategy and business insight that needed to be combined with that powerful function for it to be used effectively. I think AI is playing out the same way. For those of us who use it regularly, we understand, it's currently called prompt engineering, but is really about, hey, how do we interact with AI to have successful outputs from it? And so that's a recommendation, I guess, particularly to our colleagues in marketing, but it applies throughout the organization, is through experimentation to really understand how to inform AI so that it does produce relevant output, because it will produce output, whether it's relevant or not, really depends on the strategy that it's given. And that's not going to be replaced anytime soon, I don't believe.
If you don't mind me chiming in on this, I wanted to share an idea. When I teach, I have this one slide that I'm putting up now for the past few months where I have a picture of a statue, a bust of Pericles, the leader of Golden Age, ancient Greece and ancient Athens. And he had this famous saying about politics, and I repurposed it for the context of AI. He said famously that just because you don't take an interest in politics, it doesn't mean that politics won't take an interest in you. And I think AI is like that, meaning this is going to affect everything. So if you, even though you're not a techie person, you're just not interested in this, I don't think anyone working in an organization can really take the luxury of ignoring it. I think you've got to experiment with it. And I think there are really two ways to think about this experimentation. I think, like Jeremy was saying, this is a notion of prompt engineering. You just like interact with the machine, just learning what works, what doesn't work, how do you prompt it, what things you can do well, what things you cannot do well. There's a lot of things you still cannot do very well. Mm-hmm. And so that's one part of individual learning. And I think everybody's got to do that. You can do it on your phone, make an account for free. You can do it on your sofa while you watching news. There's really no justification for why everybody shouldn't be doing this to figure this out. But there is also another one, which I think is actually the harder one, which is not the individuals learning to prompt an engine, but and by the way, I think this prompt engineering is overvalued, because I think basically, I don't think this is already getting so good at understanding you. I don't think it's that hard to actually interact with the algorithm. But I think the harder part is to understand how to slot this technology into business function, business processes. You have an information flow in a company to try to get a job done. Where do you use it? Where do you use humans? How do you get them to work together? What's the timeline of this? What kind of products and how do they interface? What kind of quality controls? What is the human supervision, the human in the loop? All of those things I think are actually much harder, because they are not just about an individual learning, but it's about the interaction of many complex factors, including, human employees, infrastructure, technologies, and the needs of the business. So I think putting that puzzle together, I think, is actually very difficult, and much more difficult than just, getting everybody to spend a week on ChatGPT. I think that's, everybody's got to do it, but I don't think that's where the real potential lies. The real potential lies in truly understand how you can, complement human intelligence with this new artificial intelligence, so that you optimize the collective intelligence of the organization from both, our old carbon-based brains and the new silicon-based ones.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I think that's great advice. And I wanted to circle back, not just on the and also talked about Jeremy. You talked about the technology producing answers that are relevant in inverted kind of commas, and because we know that kind of relevance sometimes with the some of the technology, it does struggle to say no or I don't know, and sometimes it makes kind of things up. And so I think it's incumbent on us in terms of just being balanced, to also to talk about what sort of safeguards should brands be putting in place to make sure that when they experiment, that they're doing so when they get the output, so make sure it's safe and it's appropriate and all these different things. So, I mean, Jeremy, what sort of safeguards should we do? Is this that it should always have people like humans in the loop, or should it be that we should be testing it? Or what sort of things would you say?
Well, I think there are foundational safeguards, like we're talking about making sure the technology is not biased, does not provide sensitive or personal information. All of those things I think are important, and I think a lot of investment is going in to make sure that those safeguards are in place. As I think about it from a brand leader's perspective, all of a sudden I've been given a very powerful tool. But if used inappropriately, it could have very, in my opinion, poor effect on the brand. Like, you need to reinforce the brand has meaning. And what does the brand need to mean in the world? And what are the experiences my brand needs to provide? Because all of a sudden this technology can provide all kinds of experiences. And, one of Stefano's earlier points, even when we think about even interactions like content, mass personalization. Well, that's great, but if it's not in the context of the meaning and purpose of that brand and within the safeguards of what it means to be part of that brand, then it could be very dangerous too. Because we lose meaning, we perhaps confuse consumers because we're telling so many stories so many different ways. And so to me, that's one of the biggest safeguards, is that still need for human oversight and perhaps even a a better or even more important need for clear strategy. Who's my target consumer? What's the experience I'm trying to deliver to them, so that then the technology can be used effectively to go out and create that type of engagement.
No, that's fair. Stefan, anything to add to that?
Well, I want to echo a couple of things. The first one is that the arrival of generative AI should never be seen now as an excuse for thinking less. In fact, I think we need to think even harder. So I think, this is one thing that I see in generally with big data, advanced analytics, and now generative AI, this trend that a lot of people think, oh, great, you have this amazing thing, can do the thinking for me. I don't have to bother about this. And it's not true at all. I mean, the more advanced the technology you're working with, the more careful you need to be, the more deliberate, strategic, thoughtful you ought to be. That's one. And the second one, it's a joke, but I think of ChatGPT as male because it sounds eminently confident, even when he has no clue what it's doing. And so I think there is this, you see it when you interact with the technology, that there is no good appreciation for what the language of uncertainty. Basically, you ask it to do something, you'll do it, and it sounds very smart, and it sounds very reasonable, and it could be completely wrong. And I think this is another way of saying we still need human expertise. Human expertise is needed to make that judgment. So if you have someone who is not an expert using this technology, could be very easily fooled in between brackets by that technology when it is incorrect. But expertise can manage that, because know what is good and what is bad when you see an output, and so you're able to address issues of veracity, reliability, hallucinations, or whatever.
Perfect. I think that's absolutely kind of like fair. But the idea that we should use the technology as smart, but we need to kind of make sure that this is not going to give us a free ride. We have to kind of make sure that we have to fully engage with it, be able to get the most out of it. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all ills. It's a tool in the end. And we have to make sure that we build our own capability and our own smarts and insight and vision in order to be able to get the most out of it. Otherwise, if we don't, I have this old saying that I use: is if we don't decide what we want, then we get what we get given.
That's a good one.
Right. But we've talked a lot about all these different things. I just wanted to sort of wrap it up a little bit now and say, is there anything else that we've missed out that you wanted to highlight or add from the kind of the report before I ask you some quick fire questions to wrap up today? Jeremy, anything you want to add?
Just it goes along with some of what Stefano was saying earlier about the need for strategy of where to use the technology. As any type of adoption or hype cycle like this, we've got a proliferation of point solution vendors out talking to colleagues, across the board in organizations. And, some people feel the need to act more quickly because they understand what we've talked about that this technology is here. It is going to have rapid effect. And so my advice would be, is to, we need a bit of strategy here. So at the same time where we're learning, we're testing, we've got to be doing all those things. Also, let's not pull the trigger too quickly on the next vendor that comes in the door unless we understand how that fits into our strategy, or more appropriately perhaps is to take a test and learn approach. What type of small pilot can we do to make sure this does have the effect that we think it's going to? That's one of my closing thoughts.
Excellent. Stefano, anything to add?
For me, a call for trying to be open-minded and try to really be creative when you think about the potential of this technology to transform your business. And I think a lot of the use cases that we tested and people are talking about are the kind of the obvious ones. And I think those ones will be useful, but there will not be much competitive advantage when everybody is doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. So what can you do that is more specific to your organization, your culture, perhaps your capabilities that can really be enhanced by this technology? I think for a lot of companies, they might actually be also in the shape of insights. I think we are using this technology mostly for content creation, right? For writing documents, summarizing documents, and creating images or whatever it is. But these models are built on essentially the entire wisdom and stupidity of the internet, let's say. And so there's a lot of insight you can glean from these engines. So one area that I'm really excited to start learning more about is the extent to which this technology could serve some role in the process of market research or market insight. Can you understand better your customers by using large language models, by almost interviewing them or serving them in some way when prompted appropriately in the appropriate context? It could be an interesting supplement addition to market research. Sometimes it could be something you do on top of things. Sometimes something you do when you wouldn't have done anything. There are many decisions that we make in companies which we don't have the time or the money or the attention to, set up a formal study. But what if you could, get some, sanity checks by just spending some time on a large language model? So I think that people like Jeremy and GBK that are really at the leading edge of how do you use advanced analytics for market insights? I think partners like them, I think would be interesting for a lot of companies to talk to and see what can they do well, what they can do great, and what can they do really badly. So you make sure you don't also go out and make some stupid mistakes.
I think it's a great point. I mean, something that I'd build on it because I actually do foresee. So I think there's a huge amount of untapped informal data or feedback that gets shared with companies on a hour by hour, day by day basis, and a lot of that kind of comes into help desk, service centers, contact centers, all these different sort of things. And I can see actually how people in marketing wanted to build bigger insight, which is outside the whole formal survey paradigm, really sort of digging into some of that whole real-time interaction data and using the technology to plumb that for insights, which then starts to smash down the walls of kind of like collaboration and all these different things. And actually, it's like almost the technology could become like a forcing function that pushes service and marketing and sales closer together, because service has gathered this kind of almost like an essentially unplumbed kind of like mine of insight, which is, I think it could be a treasure trove of data. And so anyway, I agree with you that there's a massive opportunity in insight, but it's also about kind of how do you kind of plumb it all together within an organization, and how do you get creative in order to try and access that. So I think it's a good point.
Well, I'm excited. Stefano kind of preluded this, is that we're getting to work with some major brands on this topic directly. Right. So we're coming in and talking about some frameworks, but hearing from the team about what they're learning and really it's exciting to see the potential. And so, Adrian, maybe we should talk again later this year, because I expect that we're going to have some more published insights on the way that marketing leaders can take advantage of this to drive even more insight into the decision-making process.
I mean, it's perfect, because I've long advocated for the idea that CMOs within big brands should start acting like their own internal VCs, and actually start looking for kind of areas and projects that they can invest in, but in other areas which might not have as big budgets as they might have, and they might not have the and so I think there's a lot of scope for that to change, and bridges to be built and in plumbing to be laid and all these different things. So yes, let's kind of like reconnect and see if there's what else we can talk about kind of later in the year. But bringing it to an end, some quick fire questions before we finish. So my podcast is called Punk CX, but what I wanted to do is, we talked about lots of different things. I would like to come to you and ask for you, what would be your best advice to someone listening in that wants to improve their customer and or employee experience? And to make it easy for you, I want you to complete the sentence. I'll start with you, Stefano. That if you want to improve your customer or employee experience, Stefano says, do this, ... Complete that sentence.
Okay. I'm going to go for something very basic, which is understand your customer. There's a lot of emphasis on technology and basically the capabilities of systems and new algorithms. But I think they are nothing unless they serve the customer. And I think we often see companies that tend to forget a little bit of that. The way that sometimes technology, including generative AI, is being deployed is often not really to the service of great customer experiences. It is obviously often an exercise in cost cutting, but I think that there is really real damage. They're trying to call any company on the phone, trying to actually speak to a person. And so you see how oftentimes technology is not seen as a device for improving the customer experience. And I think that's often a mistake.
Perfect. Jeremy, same question to you. Complete that sentence, sir.
Stefano took mine, which I'd say like take an outside-in perspective. An outside-in perspective is so key. But what I'll add to it is, even the world's largest brands can't be everything to everybody. So as we take an outside-in approach, let's understand the group of consumers who we're trying to serve and understand what makes them different. Because as we deploy these technologies, these user experiences, we really need to craft that entire journey and experience for that group. Perhaps it is a group that prefers that I don't have to call anybody. I can find everything online. Or perhaps it's the exact opposite. But those types of insights about who I'm trying to serve are just so important for the brand to be successful, no matter how large it is.
Perfect. So, second question on my quick fire round is, this is the Punk CX podcast. We have to have a punk question in there. So I come back to you, Jeremy, on this one. So if you want to come back to you, Jeremy, first on this one. If I was to ask you, what company or brand do you think takes a more punk approach to its customer experience, or is an experienced leader, it leads on that sort of a holistic approach to experience, who would you say and why?
Yeah, so I go when I get questions like this around with T-Mobile. I'm a proud T-Mobile alum, and I think what that brand has done, going from a laggard to a leader worldwide now in the telecom space, was built on customer experience and the energy of a brand that we see, punk-like brand. So I think them really understanding a consumer need, a key consumer need, and being able to serve that over and over is, to me, the punk brand of the century, maybe.
And that's kind of like the genesis of that. I think was of that transformation was the John Legere sort of like story, who's no longer with T-Mobile, when he talked about being an uncarrier and customer service is broken and all the things that went from there. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, John is very punk, I think. The opportunity to work for him. And then also Mike Sievert, who we're proud to be a Wharton grad, is now at the helm of the company carrying on that tradition. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Same question to you, Stefano. Kind of, who do you think takes a more punk approach to customer experience, or is an experienced leader, and why?
I mean, after 23, I think the obvious one for me is also the one that you may not be thinking about anything punk about, but I'd say Microsoft. I mean, if you look at what they've done with the partnership with OpenAI and now deploying Copilot across a suite of Office, looking at what's happening with Bing, after basically having essentially almost given up on the search business, they now identify new avenues for trying to challenge Google. The way of integrating generative AI into existing corporate solutions such as cloud, to me, that company I expect them to be the most valuable company in the world soon, overtaking Apple, I would expect. So, pretty punk to me. Yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Now, one last question, and this is the one I've been introducing recently, because sometimes I find myself waking up in the morning and I scan the headlines and I find myself just constant doom scrolling, because the world is odd and weird kind of right now. And there's some strange things going on. So I've been asking people, before we wrap up, to end on a good news story or a positive note. So I'll come back to you, Stefano, kind of first, is what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week? Or just something that you've seen that's made you smile? So that can be a good news story. What do you think?
It's not super new, but I don't know how many people have really been following this. But over last year, we've had a number of interesting things happening in astronomy. And particularly to me, the James Webb Telescope has been an incredible thing to read about. And I really advise everybody to learn about this machine that we've built and the way it works. And it's not like the Hubble Space Telescope was an amazing achievement, but it's just, it goes around the Earth pretty close to where we are. While this thing needed to be far away from us in order to be in the dark space. And basically we send this thing on its own in deep space, basically, very far from the Earth. And then now this thing's opened itself up, created an enormous screen that protects it from sunlight and can see much, much deeper into space and into time than anything we've had before. So to me, that has put a big smile on my face.
Awesome. Fantastic. Jeremy, what about you, sir?
I need to learn to go before Stefano, not after. But I think that's a great answer. Perhaps a bit more boring, but yet still good news, I think, is just what we're seeing in the macroeconomic condition. I mean, we all know that I think that the forecasts have been wrong for the last several years about this, but even with the unease of of current forecasts, what I'm seeing when I'm talking to my colleagues and with our clients is a general interest in investing to grow again. Where we've been through a period of such uncertainty, dramatic uncertainty. And so, it's fun now to see those headlines and people maybe taking a little bit of breath. Hopefully they're right, that this is going to be a year for the type of growth. But then the type of work that we get to do at GBK and with Stefano and others is really focused on growth and companies investing to learn more. So it provides a much more exciting time for us to be able to do those types of work too.
Awesome.
No, Jeremy, I think you make a good point. If you went up a year ago and you looked at I think pretty much exactly 100% of economists were predicting a recession in 2023, and clearly, the U.S. economy has been roaring. Yeah. And I learned something. Never take betting advice from an economist. I think that's fascinating.
I remember in my economics undergrad, I remember that they saying that economists predicted 5 out of the last 3 recessions. So now it came.
And on that note, as a trained economist myself, but a kind of hopefully a reformed economist, I would like to say, Stefano, Jeremy, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Congratulations on the report. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and your insight with me today. That's been awesome. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the time, Adrian. Follow us on LinkedIn at GBK Collective. Report's freely available. We'd love folks to download it, talk about it, refute it, comment. That'd be great.
Thank you, Adrian. And I'd like to draw your listeners to our portal, AI at Wharton, and lots of free materials, podcasts and articles and lots of stuff there if you want to understand how AI impacts the world of business.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I will make sure I get all that kind of linked up and point people to that in the highlights that we'll kind of write up. But for one final kind of thank you from me, gentlemen. That's been great.
Thanks, Adrian. Good to see you again.
Bye.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.